Okay, morning everyone. Welcome to briefing on Friday the 10th. Seems to have whizzed all by already this month. As I said earlier in the week, we're in a very changeable weather pattern. It'll be down to timings of fronts. This is what went through yesterday evening and sort of stopped the evening group. And the cold front was dying out. There wasn't much rain on it, more cloud and just occasional bits of drizzle. But it brings us into a sort of westerly air mass with reasonably close isobars. At the moment, the forecast is suggesting 20 knots of flying heights, but definitely think as this low pressure tracks to the east across northern Scotland and the sort of Shetland Islands, we're going to start to see the isobars tighten up late afternoon, so it will get breezier as the afternoon goes on, that's for sure. Pressures 1016, so not particularly high. The air is reasonably unstable. Not enough to produce showers. I don't think there's nowhere on the forecast I've seen sort of shower activity. So TAFs, yeah, reasonably short from Farnborough, 248 knots. I've seen that the last couple of days. It's more westerly on the ground here, and I think it will be slightly southwesterly for most of the day, probably a bit stronger than 8 knots at the moment, and I think it'll stay about 10 to 12 knots with gusts about 15 on the ground for most of the day, then picking up later in the afternoon. Scattered at 4,500 feet, yeah, I think eventually cloud base will progress that high. As things start to dry out a little bit, remember ground's a bit damp still, yeah, cold front's just gone through, so it's a bit of drying to take place. None of the other forecasts are giving anything different really, so I think a fairly steady picture over the day. Upper winds, centre of the country 230, others are suggesting about 240, 250, 20 knots, so perhaps a little bit more westerly than the Met Office is suggesting. But of note, and I'll show you on top Meteo, it just shows that it is picking up later in the day. SatPic shows the cold front here, very weak feature, little spots of rain on it right down to the south, but not much, having gone through. And if you play the animation, you can see that over us, the clouds starting to sort of build a little bit, you know, with the early convection that's taking place. So in here, we're starting to see this bubbling up and filling in, which it will do, I think, for a bit this morning. It'll take a while to dry itself out. Temperature wise, I think, yeah, about 20, 21 degrees. It got up to 18 yesterday. I think it's feel a few degrees warmer than that, but it's always hard to tell when you're perhaps stood on the ground with the wind chill. So yeah, quite warm and pleasant, certainly in the south. That's what I'm working on, 21 degrees. And dew points currently, they're around 11s, 12s. Yesterday, they're about the same sort of figure. And then when the trough line went through and you started to get some soaral weather, after that, they went down to about 8. So I think probably 8s to 9s today would be realistic. So pretty good temperature split. You can see where they're getting the principle of 4,500 foot cloud base. Top Meteo and Skysight are not quite suggesting that much. But looking at the soundings, that's the sort of 9, 10 o'clock one, lines close together. So probably lots of cloud in here initially, and then by 12, 1 o'clock, they're moving apart. And with sort of 20 degrees and dew points, if they're down about 8, I think you're looking at 4,000 feet above sea level. Cloud tops with chance of spread out because of this inversion here, about 5.5. But I think as the day goes on, that inversion starts to sort of dry out, and then the lines come apart. We start to see the inversion beginning to disappear, so less chance of spread out later on. Don't see why with with sort of 20, 21 degrees and a fairly low dew point. We shouldn't get 4,500 foot cloud base. Cloud tops about 5. So fairly reasonable day, I would have thought. But again, note the fairly fresh westerly winds, 20 knots, maybe 20 knots plus at flying heights. Top Meteo is suggesting it gets going. It's 11 o'clock, and then by 12 o'clock we've got sort of 1,300 meters here. I think that's going to be the case. It'll be late morning before this starts to rise enough to be sensibly usable. And then by sort of 2 o'clock, 1,500 meters here, so 4,500 feet across a band. Sort of really from Dorset up to Cambridgeshire, that area here. And in the afternoon, they're suggesting it goes blue here. Blues, I don't think it's sea air that's coming in. That will be an influence later in the day, I think, with a slight southwesterly wind. But I can't quite see why it might go blue here as opposed to a little bit further north where they're suggesting there's cumulus. It looks to me like one of those days where the wind's just right for a sort of convergence lines from the West Country up towards Cambridgeshire. Good lines of convergence with the air coming off the Bristol Channel here and up this way from the channel to the south of us. So interesting day. Cloud amounts, the same by 11 o'clock. It should have turned into proper cumulus, less chance of spread out. I think early spread out will be a case around us. And then by sort of 2, 3 o'clock, the cumulus beginning to disappear. We get a line of what you could describe as possible convergence up through here, but still good into Oxfordshire and Cambridgeshire. And suggested distance for 18-meter gliders is really anywhere down to the southwest, but not too far, down towards Dorset, and then running back up into Oxfordshire and Cambridgeshire. Should be good for 400 to 500k today for an 18-meter glider. Hopefully with this wind direction, you're going to get some streeting as well. If you can align your task with those, it would be good. And a note of the wind arrows, just getting breezy over there. And we'll look at the 1,500 foot winds that Top Meteo are forecasting, 10 to 15 knots in the morning. And as we go through by about 12 o'clock, it's picking up 15 to 20. And you can see the afternoon starting to show these green bands coming through. So I think late afternoon, we're going to have 20 knots plus, 25 knots probably. Upper winds 1,500, 2,000 feet. As the sort of low pressure tracks a bit further to the east. Don't think it's going to get particularly windy, even overnight. It just changes a little bit. And tomorrow dies off again, hopefully back down to sort of 10 to 15 knots tomorrow. Okay, sky sight, just a quick gross error check. That's their suggested distance, same sort of area. And the picture seems pretty similar really on sky sight. So that'd be the area I think you intend to fly cross country from. Right, airspace wise, not a lot in terms of NOTAMs, usual stuff with Southampton's hours of operation, and number 22 is high intensity radio transmissions from Boscombe down, so not an issue for us. Number 16 is just an equestrian event, requesting no overflying by powered aircraft for below a certain height. Nothing to worry about for us. So in the area down, all the way down to North Hill and up towards Grandson Lodge and beyond, there are no other NOTAMs to worry about. Slightly busier on the airfield. Flight plan filed for an A319 coming in from Iceland to us, and it's in theory going to get here at about 11 o'clock-ish. So what I would suggest is when you want to actually go and launch, come out to the launch point. Don't just dump your glider at the launch point. And that's the same with club single-seaters. Don't just leave them at the launch point, because if we've suddenly got to clear the runway, it's a real pain, because we can find ourselves short of people and have lots of gliders there. So be aware of that one. And this afternoon, Farnborough ILS calibration. They'll be doing some runs onto 06 from varying heights and varying directions. Some of them run over the top of us. They'll be talking to us on the radio. It's a DA42 twin. I think that runs from 1 o'clock, but there's no precise timing on that because they're doing Shoreham as well on that one. So just keep a listen out on the radio if you're local, and we'll be speaking to them when they do run across us to make sure there's no conflict with gliders or cables. Apart from that, should be a nice day, bit breezy, but certainly good for soaring. Okay, we'll see you out there fairly shortly if you're on the club list.